Why, hello, WCA. Mike Amori. This position should look very familiar to all of you. It happens to be the same exact position we ended last week's video with. And I think that's it. Maybe I'll just announce that and call it a day. No, I won't. I'm reviewing this for a reason. In chess games, you're going to be constantly asked to calculate forcing variations. To go forward with our program or to go forward in chess, you have to know what that means. Forcing moves are basically moves that give your opponent very little choice of how to answer. Sometimes they have no choice but to do something very concrete. In this position last week, we saw a master with the white pieces sacrifice this rook on g1 for the pawn up here on g7. Now again, if you're doing simple math, you're making a mistake, because you're giving away 5 points for 1. So if this were a math class, you didn't do so well. But this is not a math class. There's math involved, but it's not pure math. If you really want to do math in this position, then let's do it this way. Instead of worrying about how many points you're giving up, let's think like that master did last week. Would everyone watching agree that this queen here on d6 is very close to the squares that lead to the king? Of course. This knight is only one move away from checking the king if you could make the king go to g7, which you can. If this rook sacrifices itself, do you see that the rook here on d1 can instantly slide over and continue the attack? Well, if my math is correct, 9 plus 3 is 12, plus 2 rooks. That's 22. 22 points of power. Attacking. Okay, how many points protecting the king? In terms of the big pieces, it's really only this bishop. Now, if you attack this pawn on f7, then you have a fight on your hands, because there's a rook, a queen, and a king defending that pawn. But the one on g7, not so fast. Only the king. That's why this attack worked, because of the simple rook takes g7. Okay, once that happens, the king has very little choice. It's a forcing move. You either take the rook or go into the corner, because it's check. If you go into the corner, queen f6 was crushing. We discussed that last week. And then naturally, if you took the rook, a very simple checkmate. Check. The bishop has to block, best move, and then knight f5 check. What do? The bishop cannot take the knight because it's pinned. The king goes to g8, and then queen f6. Again, the knight cannot be captured because of the pin here, and there's no way to stop mate on g7. Okay? Now, I use the word simple. Things are not so simple, because I missed the same exact idea in a game this weekend against a master. And I'm going to show you that in a moment. Let me see if I can change this board. I'm amazed when I do this. Okay. At the Olympiad, every 2 years, the world's best players compete for their countries in chess Olympiads. And one just concluded in Batumi, Georgia. And this is a position from one of those games. At the WCA, we had talked a lot about something called a pawn wedge, which is basically when two pawns are bumping heads. Do you see this pawn here on g5? Do you see how it's dangerously close to coming here? Now, if I could put the pawn here, do you see how these two pawns are bumping heads? Yes, they are. Now watch, my computer's probably going to whistle when I let go. There it goes. Did you hear that whistle? Yeah, ChessBase will whistle anytime you're about to play an illegal move. It is white's turn, but white would not be able to push that pawn. Why? Well, they're in check. We'll get to that in a moment. Anyway, back to this pawn wedge. If you get a pawn to the 6th rank, see that number 6 over there? If you get a pawn to the 6th rank and it happens to be near the enemy king, very often this pawn wedge is worth a whole piece, as long as you have power pieces working behind it. Now, in the position, you'll see that white has two minor pieces, because white just took a bishop up here on b7. White then is in check here, moved out of check, giving black an option of taking the bishop on b2. That was black's whole idea. So once that happened, once you took that bishop in the corner, it becomes white's turn. There is a forced win here. Let's see if you can find it. Pause the video. Let me know what you find. Okay. That's it. Game over. The king only has one legal move. And once the king moves to g8, you lock the king in with that pawn wedge, and black is completely lost. It's very, very difficult to stop a forced checkmate here unless you give up serious material. Now, where is the mate? If, for instance, or for some reason you play some random move like this, attacking the queen, you have a forced checkmate. Can you find it? Beautiful. There's that rook sacrifice again. Black has no other move but to accept the rook. And once you take it, the queen slides all the way down to h1. I mean, you could block with your queen, but white's just going to take that. So you might as well just hide your king. And then the queen swoops up the board, checkmating on that square. Now, let's concentrate and calculate at the same time. I'm going to put the position back. There's the pawn wedge. Here's the forced mate. The rook attacks your queen. Just do it in your head. It's mate in 3. Can you see it? Excellent. Okay, let me try to change the board again. Aha. This one I really don't want to show you, but I'm going to do it because I have to be honest. I told you at the beginning of the video, my personal weakness out of those big 3, I concentrate fairly well. Confidence, yeah, when I'm playing masters, they're a little bit higher than me. I'm not too worried about losing the game. So I was pretty confident here, but I don't calculate as well as I can. So in this position, white has built up a pretty nice attack, and I do have the white pieces against the black king. The problem for black is this bishop here on c8 is blocking the connection between the rooks, as well as the king, really. I mean, black didn't get a chance to castle, so there's a lot of pressure coming on the board. Given a chance, white would like to put this bishop here on g6 and take advantage of this pin. And really, if black moves any of these pawns on this side of the board, they're really just asking for trouble. So my opponent, being attacked, decided to trade the queens. And this is an experienced master. And when masters make moves like this, their thinking is, I need to get the queen off the board. If I can get the queen off the board, I mean, white could take the queen, the king could take back, and white could even win a pawn here. And I think white's position's probably pretty good, but this game is completely over right now. And yeah, I missed it. I actually missed several wins in this game and then was lucky to draw. All right, pause the video. What did I miss? Aha, some of you have it. Well, I played this wonderful looking rook f6 thinking I was being really fancy, and it is kind of a cool move because if black takes this, we're just going to take back with the pawn. I guess I can show you this new variation. And then we just take back with the pawn, and now we're attacking the queen, and then our next move is going to be up here to queen g7, and black is in a whole heap of trouble. So my opponent didn't take that. But after queen e7, I totally missed the same idea. Would everyone in the room agree that the white queen is attacking this area? Yes. Is the bishop attacking this area? Yes. How about the rook on f1? No question. How about the rook on b1? Again, what happens if this rook disappears? It only takes one move for this rook to get here. So I spent a lot of time, calculating this move rook f6, and I completely ignored the winning rook takes pawn. Game over. If the king just moves somewhere, you take the queen with the rook. So what does black do? they have to take the rook. But how? If they take with the queen, the move that I missed was queen d8 check. How does black get out of check? Well, you have to block with the queen. Okay, you guys have a good idea in mind? Remember the concept. The rook gets in the game in one move. Check. There's only one way out of check. Don't forget the queen is pinned. King g8, queen takes queen, checkmate, game over. So when I take that rook, if you take, or the pawn rather, if you take my rook with your queen, you lose. And then naturally, what if you take with the king? In this case, try to think of what the king's responsibility is. The white queen and the black queen are facing off. If this king was kicked away, you would win the queen. Well, how can you kick the king away? You guys see it? Bishop g6 check. If you don't want to lose the queen for nothing, you only have one move. That would be king f8. Okay, continue the same exact concept. Rook f1. Now, I'm going to put a highlight on for you. Isn't it funny? Remember that pawn wedge from the other position? This bishop actually acts like a pawn wedge, even better, because he can see this far, all the way up to the e8 square, but it's a very, very similar concept. In this position, the only move is king to g8, and then the queen just falls. And that's really, really bad. What else could have happened here? After you sack that rook and the king takes, well, you give that check. The king can go to f8, and then you play rook f1 check. And here, again, if you don't want to lose that rook, queen for nothing, you just have to give the queen away here. And believe it or not, pawn takes queen is very strong, but it's even stronger just to take the queen with the rook. Because if you do, check, one move, and checkmate. How's that? Okay? Yeah, too bad. I missed that one. Whoops. They want to ask if I want to save it. Why not? I'll save that game. All righty. Last one. Okay, I want to leave you with this pawn structure. We'll close the video here. Do you see the pawn here on the 6th rank? It's all connected to the same attacking idea that you saw in those two games. That pawn restricts the king's exit. He cannot get out of those squares. So any check on the back rank is going to finish the game. If the king came to this square and you were able to check with a rook, everybody should see that this would be his only move. So even moving back, just play with that position in your mind for a minute. Imagine a queen checking on this square, king forced here, and then having a rook land on this square. You guys see the patterns? Okay, you keep working on those. I'm going to leave you here. This is enough of an introduction. You come next week, we're going to start calculating, concentrating, and which one did I leave out? Oh yeah, that confidence thing. Have a nice week, everyone.